The vast, silent blackness near the edge of Earth's solar system was torn open. Light bent and twisted as the Zarkani fleet slid into reality. They were not subtle. Their ships were angular and dark, like knives made for cutting planets. Sensors on Pluto's outpost died first, sending one last shriek of warning before going quiet on Earth. In the Unified Defense Command Center, Admiral De Jong felt the alert before he heard it. A deep, vibrating chime filled the room. Screens lit up with hostile signatures. Hundreds of them. His stomach turned to ice. He was an older man, his hair more gray than black, and he had seen many crises. But never this. A signal was forced through every channel, global and military. A face appeared on the main screen. It was leathery, with 4 dark eyes set in a row. This was Commander Krall. His translated voice was a dry rasp, full of a confidence that came from burning 100 worlds. "People of Sol," the voice stated. It did not ask for attention. It demanded it. "Your little civilization has grown enough to be noticed. You will now surrender your colonies, your resources, and your orbital space. You will do this immediately. If you refuse, we will methodically break your fleet and then turn your home world into a floating cinder. You have 1 of your hours to send your submission." The screen went blank. For a moment, there was only the hum of computers and the sound of frightened breathing in the command center. Admiral De Jong did not waste time. "Battle stations," he said, his own voice surprisingly steady. "Recall all patrols. Form the primary defense line between Mars and Earth. Power up every weapon we have." The room exploded into controlled chaos. But De Jong had another thought, a symbolic one. He called his communications officer, a young woman named Hannah. "Contact the Lunar Orbit Museum," he ordered. "Tell Curator Jihan he has an immediate military order. He is to move the History Flotilla from its moorings to Lagrange Point 4. Get them out of the immediate engagement zone." Hannah looked confused. "The museum ships, sir? The old ones?" "Yes," De Jong said. "They are still spaceworthy, just barely. I will not have our first ships destroyed as static targets. They mean something. Now send the order." Hannah nodded and turned to her console. Far from Earth, floating in the quiet near the moon, the History Flotilla hung in a perfect, peaceful row. The UNSS Gagarin, humanity's first successful fusion-powered ship, was a pitted cylinder of gray metal, its original markings faded. Next to it was the UNSS Mandela, a blocky frigate from the asteroid wars, its hull still bearing the black scars of old laser fire. The last was the UNSS Magellan, a bulky, awkward-looking deep space explorer from over a century ago, with huge, old-fashioned sensor dishes. On the bridge of the Magellan, Curator Jihan read the emergency order on his ancient screen. He was a thin man in his 50s, with kind eyes that usually held a faraway look, as if he was always seeing the past. Now they were wide with fear. He had a small team, just 3 other museum staff. They were historians, not soldiers. "We need to go," he said to them. "Now. Start the pre-ignition sequence for the tow tugs. We need to get to Lagrange 4. The process was slow. The museum ships did not have their own main engines active. Small, modern tug drones detached from the lunar dock and latched onto the 3 great relics. With gentle bursts of thruster fire, they began to pull the flotilla away, a procession of antiques moving through a modern battlefield. It did not go unnoticed. Back in the Zarkani flagship, Commander Krall watched the human movements. His tactical screen showed their modern warships gathering, forming neat defensive lines. He sneered. They were predictable. Then a sub-officer pointed out 3 new, incredibly slow-moving heat signatures. "What are these?" Krall asked, leaning forward. Data scrolled. Age estimates. Power readings. His sneer turned into an open laugh, a harsh, grating sound. "They are moving their museum pieces," the sub-officer said. Sounding amused, Krall commanded his communication officer to open a channel again. This time, he directed it specifically at the human military frequency. On Admiral De Jong's screen, Krall's face reappeared. This time, the 4 eyes were squinted with cruel humor. "Humans?" Krall began, his rasping voice dripping with mockery. We see your preparations. Your little warships are almost cute. But what truly confuses us, what truly delights us, is this. A smaller window popped up, showing a magnified image of the UNSS Magellan being slowly towed by a tiny drone. Its rust spots and outdated design were clear. Are you sending us your history? Crawl continued, his laughter barely contained. Your scrap? Are these your famous museum ships? They are floating coffins, rusty graves for dead ideas. In the command center, officers flinched. The insult was felt by everyone. De Jong's jaw tightened. Crawl went on. We thought you might offer a fight. Instead, you offer us a museum tour. Very well. After we smash your real fleet, we will collect these relics. We will put them in our own trophy hall. We will label them. Here are the pathetic toys of a species that reached too high. Remember this moment, humans. This is the day you tried to frighten the storm with a child's drawing. The transmission ended. The silence in Earth's command center was heavier than before. The insult was galactic. It was broadcast for all to hear. The shame was a physical weight on the bridge of the slowly moving Magellan. Ji-hun had heard it all. He stood in the dim light, his hand resting on a console made of real plastic and metal, not holograms. He looked at the faded photograph of his grandmother, Soo-yun, taped to the side of the monitor. She had been the Magellan's last chief engineer. He looked out the viewport at the uncaring stars, and then at the approaching Zarkani fleet on his passive sensor screen. A swarm of angry red dots. They saw only rust and obsolescence. They saw a joke. Ji-hun's fear began to harden into something else. A quiet, simmering anger. They called his ship a coffin. Toy. They ridiculed the very foundation of what had brought humanity here. He did not know how, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The past was not just for remembering, and these old bones of ships still had teeth. He just had to find them. The laughter from the stars seemed to echo in the silent corridors of the UNSS Magellan. Ji-hun stood alone on the command bridge, the admiral's order to secure the relic ringing in his ears. Secure it from what? A single Zarkani missile would vaporize the century-old ship. The order felt like a formality, a polite gesture before a funeral. His small crew, 2 other historians and a retired dock technician, were huddled around the ancient thermal monitor, watching the tactical feed from Earth Command. The modern human fleet, sleek and fierce, was engaging the Zarkani vanguard near the orbit of Mars. Bursts of light dotted the screen. Each silent flash represented a ship dying. They're holding, the technician murmured, but his voice was thin with hope. Ji-hun didn't answer. He was looking at his own ship, not at the screens, but at the physical reality of it. The bridge was a museum piece. Manual control yokes, physical switches with faded labels, cracked vinyl seats. But his grandmother, Soo-yun, had loved this ship. She hadn't just maintained it. She had whispered to it. In her final years, her mind lost in time, she would grab Ji-hun's wrist with a strength that belied her age. The heart is still beating, grandson, she'd say, her eyes sharp for a moment. The wrong song can break a mountain. The right one can save it. It's in the bones. Remember, it's in the bones. Everyone thought it was the rambling of an old engineer. But Ji-hun, the historian, had listened. He had spent a decade studying the Magellan's declassified schematics. Most saw a clumsy deep space explorer. He saw a patchwork of experimental systems, hastily sealed off and labeled stable. Do not reactivate. One system in particular haunted him. Project GRA, Gravitic Resonance Array. The official record stated it was a failed attempt at artificial gravity. But the ancillary notes, his grandmother's personal logs he had inherited, told a different story. Test 7, target asteroid, 5M Dia, exhibited molecular decoherence at resonance frequency 7.45 psi. Molecular decoherence. It didn't create gravity. It convinced matter to stop being solid. It was a weapon so terrifyingly unstable, so against the ethos of the Magellan's mission of peace, that they had bricked it up inside the ship's central spine and wiped the databases. The ship shuddered slightly. A distant vibration through the hull. A shock wave from the battle, minutes old, finally reaching them. One of the historians yelped. They were running out of minutes. Ji-hun moved. He went to a seemingly blank section of the bridge's rear wall, near the floor. He pressed a sequence of bolts in an order his grandmother had made him memorize as a child. A game, she'd called it. With a hiss of releasing pressure, a small maintenance panel swung open. Inside was not a data port, but a physical, armored handle. He pulled it. A low, deep hum resonated through the deck plates. The lights on the bridge flickered and then stabilized with a warmer, older glow. A hidden power feeder, isolated from the main museum grid, had come online. "Curator, what did you do?" the technician asked, his eyes wide. "I woke up part of its old heart," Ji-hun said quietly. He turned to the main comms panel, its design 100 years out of date. He had to send a message. Not to the admiral, who was busy fighting a war. He needed someone who could understand both the past and present. He input a personal frequency code. The signal would be weak, but it was a directed laser comm to a specific ship. After a tense moment, a face resolved on the grainy screen. It was a young woman with serious eyes and her hair tied back sharply. Lieutenant Mi-kyung, his best student from his days teaching at the academy, now a weapons officer on the modern destroyer UNSS Sentinel. "Ji-hun?" she said, her voice crackling with static. Her background was a blur of modern tactical displays. "Are you safe? We're a little busy here." "Listen to me, Mi-kyung," Ji-hun interrupted, his voice urgent. "The answer is not in the new ships." "What? Curator? This is not the time for a history lesson." "It is exactly the time," he insisted, his calm breaking. "They see our new ships and calculate their power. They see the old ones and laugh. That is their mistake. The Magellan, the Gagarin, the Mandela, they are not just metal. They are archives. They are from a time when we built things with room for secrets, with manual overrides and physical layers. When an engineer could hide a system not in software, but in the very bones of the ship." Mi-kyung stared, about to protest, but something in his intensity stopped her. She was a brilliant tactician. She understood thinking outside the box. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice lower. "I'm saying the Magellan has a system, one that was sealed. It doesn't work like anything we have today. It's called gravitic resonance." On her screen, Mi-kyung's eyes flickered to her own weapon readouts. "Resonance? You mean like a sonic weapon? We have those. They're for crowd control, not breaking shields." "No," Ji-hun said, shaking his head. "Not sonic. Gravitic. It doesn't hit the shield. It speaks to the matter inside it. My grandmother's logs say it can reduce a mountain to sand if you find the right frequency. The wrong song can break a mountain." The connection fizzed as the Sentinel maneuvered violently.
Mi-kyung's face hardened.
She was listening now, really listening. A mountain. What about a Zarkani cruiser? "I don't know," Ji-hun admitted. "But their shields, their hulls, they are just matter. Arranged very well, but still matter." Another violent shudder rocked the Magellan. A red light flashed on Ji-hun's own panel. Proximity alert. A piece of battle debris, a chunk of a shattered human fighter, was tumbling past them, missing the hull by meters. They were in the battlefield now. Mi-kyung saw the alarm on his face. "I have to go. We're being pressed back. Mars' orbit is falling." She took a sharp breath. "I'll relay this to the Admiral. But Ji-hun, find the right song. And for Earth's sake, be ready to sing it." The screen went dark. Ji-hun was left in the humming silence of the old bridge. He looked at the open panel, at the handle that had awakened a sleeping giant. The Zarkani had laughed at this ship. They called it a coffin. He walked to the viewport and saw the reflected glow of the distant battle. A silent storm of death. They had ridiculed the relics. Now he had to make them regret it. The command center on Earth was a tomb of grim faces. Admiral Dae-young watched the main tactical display, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Each friendly green light that winked out was a physical blow. The Battle of Mars was a holding action, and they were losing. A young lieutenant, Hannah, approached him. Her face was pale. "Sir, the Sentinel is reporting heavy damage." They are retreating from the engagement zone. Lieutenant Meekyung sent a priority message for you, tagged Eyes Only. Dae-young gave a short nod and moved to his private terminal. Meekyung's face appeared. She was smudged with soot, and the light in her eyes was fierce. Admiral, before we lost main power, I received a communication from Curator Ji-hun on the Magellan. The museum curator. Dae-young asked, his patience thin. Yes, sir. He's a historian. He was also my teacher. You need to listen. He believes the museum ships have a tactical use. He mentioned a sealed system on the Magellan, something called gravitic resonance. His grandmother's logs indicate it can affect matter at a fundamental level. Dae-young stared. It sounded like a fairy tale, a desperate one. Lieutenant, we are fighting a war with plasma cannons and kinetic missiles. We do not have time for ghost stories from old ships. Sir, with respect, Meekyung said, her voice straining. They are ignoring the old ships completely. The Zarkani scanners see them as inert scrap. They are not even targeting them. It is a blind spot. What if we could put a weapon inside that blind spot? The logic, however fragile, snagged in Dae-young's tactical mind. A blind spot, an unseen piece on the board. He looked back at the main display. Another human cruiser, the UNSS Seoul, vanished in a flash of light. They had maybe 6 hours before the main Zarkani force reached Earth. They were losing ships faster than they could build them. They were running out of conventional options. Can he activate it? Dae-young asked, his voice low. He's trying. He needs help. Engineers, programmers, someone who understands both old and new systems. And he needs the other museum ships. He thinks they have to work together. Dae-young closed his eyes for a second. The weight of the world felt like a mountain on his shoulders. If he diverted resources to this mad idea and it failed, he would have sent good people to die for nothing. But if he did nothing, they would all die for sure. He opened his eyes. Lieutenant Meekyung, you are reassigned. Take a fast shuttle from the Sentinel. Gather who you need. I will send orders to the remaining tugs to move the Gagarin and Mandela to the Magellan's position at Lagrange 4. You have operational command of this relic project. Meekyung looked stunned, then resolved. Yes, sir. And Meekyung, Dae-young added, his voice a gravelly whisper. Make it work. The shuttle Swift was a modern needle of metal. It carried Meekyung and 2 others she had recruited in a frantic hour. The first was Tae-won, a veteran propulsion engineer whose face was a map of wrinkles and whose hands were permanently stained with grease. He had worked on the first fusion drives 50 years ago. He knew the Gagarin like it was his own child. The second was a young, silent woman named Hannah. She was not the lieutenant from command, but a programming genius who specialized in translating ancient machine code into modern language. She clutched a heavy, old data reader to her chest. They docked with the Magellan in a haze of anxiety. The air inside the old ship was cold and smelled of dust and aged metal. Ji-hun met them at the airlock. He looked exhausted, but there was a new fire in his eyes. No time for greetings, Meekyung said, stepping past him. The Admiral gave us a window, a small one. What do you need? Ji-hun led them to the bridge, now lit by the warmer glow of the reactivated systems. He showed them the hidden panel, the schematics on his grandmother's data crystals. Hannah immediately plugged in her reader, her fingers flying across the interface as she began to untangle the archaic programming. Tae-won listened to Ji-hun's theory about the 3 ships working in concert. He grunted. The Gagarin, its main drive was unstable. We called it the heartbeat. When it skipped, it could create a tiny, short gravity spike. A flaw we engineered out in later models. He scratched his chin. If I could overclock its old reactor in a specific sequence, I could make it not a flaw but a weapon. A local gravity well. It would be short, maybe 10 seconds, but it would pull anything nearby off course. Meekyung's mind raced. A disruption. Something to make them stumble. What about the Mandela? Ji-hun called up its schematics. It's a gun platform, old coil guns, kinetic weapons. But its targeting system was built to sync with other ships in its battle group for coordinated fire. Hannah looked up from her screen. I can see it. The Magellan's gravitic resonance array doesn't shoot a beam. It emits a field, a wave of specific frequencies. But it needs a carrier wave, something physical to tune to. A kinetic impact from the Mandela could be that carrier. If the impact is timed exactly as the Gagarin creates a gravity distortion, the kinetic round would be supercharged with the resonance frequency. Mikyung finished, the plan crystallizing. It wouldn't just hit the ship. It would unmake it. The theory was there. It was a house of cards, built on old science and guesswork. As if to remind them of the stakes, the entire Magellan shuddered again. A deep, rolling boom echoed through the hull. What was that? Hannah whispered. Mikyung checked the external sensor feed. A Zarkani energy lance, meant for a fleeing human corvette, had missed. Its residual energy had washed over the Magellan's stern. Ancient shielding dissipated most of it, but alarms blared on the bridge. A small fire broke out in a secondary compartment. They were not in a blind spot. They were on the edge of the battlefield. The war was coming to them. We have to move faster, Ji-hun said. His voice tight. Tae-won was already heading for the airlock. I'm going to the Gagarin. I can have its heart beating in an hour. A dangerous, angry heartbeat. Hannah nodded, her eyes glued to her screen. I'm linking the 3 ships' ancient command networks. It will be a patchwork, but I can make them talk to each other. Mikyung looked at Ji-hun. You have to find the right frequency. The song that breaks a mountain. Outside the viewport, the stars were cold and bright. The 3 old museum ships hung together, silent and ignored by the giants fighting nearby. But inside them, a new kind of pulse was beginning. A slow, steady awakening. The air inside the UNSS Gagarin was thin and tasted of rust. Tae-won floated through the main engineering deck, his headlamp cutting a narrow beam through the perfect darkness. He had shut down the museum's environmental systems. He needed to feel the ship to hear it. His gloved hand trailed along a pipe, feeling a faint, familiar vibration. It was still there, the ghost of the pulse. The Gagarin was famous for being the first, but every engineer knew its secret. It was flawed. Its fusion core didn't hum. It thumped, like a great, slow heartbeat. Under heavy load, that thump could skip. And when it skipped, space itself would flinch. For a fraction of a second, gravity in the area would spike to 50 times normal, crushing anything not bolted down. It was a design terror they had buried in reports and fixed in the next model. Tae-won wasn't here to fix it. He was here to wake the beast. He reached the primary reactor chamber. The door was sealed with a physical will lock, frozen by time. He took a small torch from his belt. The blue flame cut through the old metal with a sharp hiss. He was not a curator preserving history. He was a mechanic saving the future, and he would not be gentle. On the bridge of the UNSS Mandela, Hannah fought a different kind of battle. She sat cross-legged on the cold deck, her modern data pad connected by a thick cable to a port that hadn't seen data in 80 years. The Mandela's computer spoke in clicks and whirs, a machine language dead to everyone but her and a few other specialists. She wasn't trying to make it modern. She was trying to make it remember. Lines of code, simple and robust, scrolled on her screen. She was building a bridge, not between the past and present, but between 3 specific points in the past. The Mandela's old targeting computer needed to talk to the Gagarin's reactor monitor and the Magellan's resonance array. They were all built in different decades by different companies for different purposes. Her fingers danced. She wrote translation protocols, simple triggers. When the Gagarin's reactor pressure reached this number, it would send a hardwired signal pulse, a simple electrical ping, down a cable she had strung through the connecting tug drone to the Mandela. That ping would be the Mandela's cue to fire one of its ancient coil guns. But the firing solution was the tricky part. The Magellan had to tell the Mandela exactly where to shoot. The resonance array, once active, would create a field. Hannah's program had to calculate the perfect point in that swirling field for the kinetic round to hit. To become the carrier wave Ji-hun described. It was like teaching 3 blind, ancient giants to sing one perfect note, in harmony, while standing on different mountains. On the Magellan, Ji-hun and Mikyung stood in the ship's deep spine. This was not a place for visitors. It was a narrow, cold corridor lined with thick cables and pipes. At the very center, behind a wall of leaded crystal, was the gravitic resonance array. It did not look impressive. It was a series of dull, metallic discs, each about the size of a dinner plate, arranged in a complex spiral. They were connected by crystalline wires that seemed to hold light inside them. It looked more like a forgotten art project than a weapon. Mikyung shone her light on it. "This is what your grandmother hid?" "She didn't just hide it," Ji-hun said, his voice quiet in the gloom. "She muted it. She said it was an instrument too powerful for the music of her time." He pointed to a small, standalone console nearby, covered in a dust cloth. He pulled it away. It had a simple keyboard and a single glass screen. A frequency modulator. "We have to find the right frequency. The one that resonates with Zarkani hull material. We have no samples, no data. So we guess," Mikyung asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. "We extrapolate," Ji-hun corrected. He called up his grandmother's logs on a handheld reader. "She tested it on asteroids on samples of early ship hulls. I have the resonance curves for titanium, for carbon composites." He showed Mikyung the wavy lines on the screen. "The Zarkani use something different. Their ships have a unique energy signature." Hannah pulled it from the tactical feeds. "See this subharmonic?" He pointed to a tiny, repeating pulse in the data. "That is a byproduct of their shield geometry. It is a vibration in spacetime itself. We can start there, find a frequency that matches that vibration, then invert it. Not to join their harmony, but to cancel it. To introduce discord." It was a theory built on sand. But it was all they had. Suddenly, the entire ship groaned. A deep, metallic sound of strain. Then, a new sound reached them, vibrating up through the deck plates. A sound that had been silent for 50 years. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow. It was powerful. It was the Gagarin's heart, beating again. The crackling voice came over Ji-hun's old hand radio. It was Taewon. "The beast is awake. And it is hungry. It will do what we ask. But it is old. It may only have one good skip in it." Mikyung keyed her own radio. "Hannah, status?" From the Mandela, Hannah's voice was tense but clear. "The bridge is built. The giants can hear each other. I am loading a single tungsten round into coilgun number 3. It is ready to sing." All the pieces were in place. 3 museum ships, connected by cables and hope and desperation. They hung together in the silent shadow of the moon, ignored by the flashes of battle growing closer. They were no longer just relics. They were a trigger cocked and waiting. Ji-hun placed his hands on the frequency modulator. His grandmother's words came back to him. "The wrong song can break a mountain." He looked at Mikyung. "We are about to make a very loud noise." The main Zarkani fleet arrived. They came not as a wave but as a wall. A solid line of angular, dark ships blotting out the stars behind them. Commander Krall stood on his command bridge, a deep satisfaction humming through him. The human defense line near Mars was shattered, their ships fleeing or drifting as dead hulks. Earth lay before him, a blue-green prize. His sensor officer chirped for attention. "Commander, the 3 primitive vessels. They have moved. They now form a loose triangle between our advance force and the planet." Krall did not even look at the tactical display. "The museum toys? They are moving?" "How?" "Small tug drones. Very slow." A laugh escaped Krall's lipless mouth. "They are putting their history on display for us. A final tribute before extinction." "How thoughtful." He gestured with a clawed hand. "Send the Vexation to clear them. A single cruiser is more than enough to turn those rust buckets into particles. I do not want their debris cluttering our approach." The order went out. The Vexation, a mid-sized Zarkani cruiser shaped like a twisted spear, detached from the main formation. It moved with a lazy confidence towards the 3 old human ships hanging in the void. Inside the Magellan, the thump from the Gagarin was a constant, unsettling drumbeat. Ji-hun's hands were sweaty on the frequency modulator. On his small screen, he saw the Zarkani cruiser approaching. It was a monster of dark metal and shimmering green energy shields. Target is designated, Mi-kyung said, her voice clipped and professional from her station. She was using the Magellan's ancient radar, painting the cruiser. Hannah, are you linked? Linked. Hannah's voice confirmed from the Mandela. Coilgun 3 is tracking. Solution is programmed. Waiting for the pull. Taewon's voice, rough with strain, came through next. The Gagarin's heart is racing. I have the overload sequence ready. On your mark, it will skip. The gravity well will last 8 seconds. It will be strong. Ji-hun stared at the data stream from his scanners. He was analyzing the cruiser's shield harmonics, the subtle energy vibration Hannah had identified. His modulator was set to a proposed inverse frequency. It was his best guess. The first note of their song. The vexation closed the distance. It did not fire. It did not even raise its shields to full power. It simply advanced, a giant walking towards 3 dolls. Any time now, Mi-kyung urged, her knuckles white. Wait, Ji-hun whispered. Let it get closer. Let it feel safe. The cruiser entered what would have been weapons range for a modern ship. Still, it did nothing. A contemptuous silence. Now, Taewon, Ji-hun said. On the Gagarin, Taewon threw a series of physical switches. The deep thump-thump-thump suddenly raced. The sound became a frantic, hammering pulse. Lights on his console flashed red. Then, there was a sound like the universe gulping. It was silent, but its effect was not. Space itself seemed to warp around the Gagarin. The tug drone holding it whined in protest. The Zarkani cruiser, the Vexation, was caught in the edge of the sudden, intense gravity well. The smooth course was violently wrenched. It lurched sideways, its hull groaning in protest. Its shields flared bright green as they compensated. But the ship was pulled off axis, tumbling slightly. For 8 seconds, it was vulnerable. Hannah, fire! Mi-kyung yelled on the Mandela. Hannah pressed a single, physical button. A magnetic coil, dormant for 80 years, energized. With a deep whump that shook the old frigate, it launched a solid tungsten slug. The size of a man's leg, it shot out into the dark. It was not fast by modern standards. It was a bullet from a past age. Resonance now? Mi-kyung said. Ji-hun pressed the activation key on his modulator. The gravitic resonance array hummed to life. The dull discs in the spine began to glow with a soft, amber light. A wave of invisible energy pulsed out from the Magellan. Not a beam, but a spreading bubble. It washed over the slow-moving tungsten slug. The slug began to vibrate. A high, almost musical ringing that translated into Ji-hun's sensors. It was now a carrier, soaked in the specific, discordant frequency meant to cancel the Zarkani shield harmony. On the Vexation, the crew recovered from their sudden tumble. The commander, angry and embarrassed, finally ordered shields to full and targeted the Gagarin. His finger was on the firing control. The tungsten slug arrived. It did not hit the shield with a flash of energy. It passed through the shimmering green field as if it were not there. The frequency carried by the slug did not oppose the shield. It matched its inherent vibration and then inverted it, creating a momentary hole. The slug struck the Vexation's hull amidships. There was no explosive detonation, no fiery breach. Where it struck, the dark Zarkani metal simply came apart. It didn't melt or shatter. It disintegrated. The effect spread from the point of impact like a ripple on a pond, the rigid hull turning into a cloud of gray, metallic dust. The ripple spread fast, consuming decks, conduits, machinery. In less than 3 seconds, the entire middle section of the Vexation vanished into an expanding, glittering cloud. The severed ends of the ship, their systems dead, drifted silently apart. Then, the cloud of dust was pulled backwards, sucked into the dying gravity well of the Gagarin before it winked out. Silence. On the Magellan's bridge, Ji-hun, Mi-kyung, and the others stared at the screen. Where a powerful warship had been, there was now only debris and a faint, glittering mist catching the sunlight on the Zarkani command ship. Commander Krall stared at his own tactical display. The icon for the Vexation had simply vanished. No explosion. No distress signal. What happened? he hissed. Report. Sensors indicate molecular disintegration. His officer stammered, confusion in its voice. The primitive vessel, it emitted an unknown energy form. The vexation's matter coherence failed. Crawl looked from his screen to the viewport, where the three old human ships hung silently. They were no longer funny. They were silhouetted against the light of the sun, dark and jagged. A cold, unfamiliar feeling crept into his gut. It was not fear. Not yet. It was the realization of a terrible miscalculation. He had ridiculed their museum ships, and one of them had just erased a cruiser from existence. Silence, thick and heavy, filled the Zarkani command bridge. Commander Crawl stared at the empty space on the tactical screen where the vexation had been. The glittering dust cloud was already dispersing, a fading monument to impossibility. How? The word was a low growl from deep in his chest. His science officer's claws trembled over the console. The energy signature is chaotic, primitive. It bypassed shield harmonics entirely. It did not attack the ship. It attacked the idea of the ship, the bonds holding its matter together. Crawl turned his four dark eyes to the main viewport. The three human relics hung in their triangle formation. They looked no different, still old, still silent, but the space around them felt different now. Dangerous. A sharp, hot anger replaced his confusion. This was an insult, a trick. He would not be humiliated by fossils. All forward elements, he barked, his voice slicing the quiet. Target the three primitive vessels. Concentrated fire. Obliterate them. Across the Zarkani battle line, weapons glowed. A dozen ships turned their predatory gaze towards the Magellan, the Gagarin, and the Mandela. Inside the Magellan, the celebration had lasted 2 seconds. They're targeting us? Mikyung said, her voice flat. All of them, alarms old and shrill, began to whoop on the bridge. Lights flashed red. On the sensor screen, a constellation of threat icons lit up, each one a Zarkani warship powering its main weapons. The Gagarin's heart is stalled. Taewon's voice came through, strained and tired. It needs time to cool. I cannot give you another gravity well. Not for many minutes. The coil gun is reloaded, Hannah reported from the Mandela. But it is a slow process. They will fire before we are ready. Jihan's hands flew over the resonance modulator. The first frequency had worked, but it was a precise note for a specific shield type. The ships now targeting them were different classes, destroyers, frigates, another cruiser. Their shield harmonics would be variations on a theme. He had to adapt. He had to make the resonance not a single note, but a chord. A disharmony that could unravel many different tunes at once. We cannot take a direct hit, Mikyung stated the obvious. One shot from any of those ships will vaporize us. Jihan didn't look up. Then we must not let them aim properly. He had an idea, a desperate one. Mikyung, can we move? Even a little? The tug drones have minimal thrust. We can drift. We cannot dodge. We don't need to dodge. We need to wobble. He explained quickly. The gravitic resonance array was designed to emit a field. What if they turned it into a shield? Not a solid barrier, but a shimmering, unpredictable bubble of shifting frequencies. A zone where space itself was musically unstable. It might not stop a direct hit, but it could scramble targeting systems, make their lasers diffuse, their missiles confused. It will drain power. It might burn out the array for good, Jihan finished. Do it, Mikyung said. Jihan input a new sequence. He set the array to emit not a focused wave, but a broad, chaotic pulse, cycling through inverted frequencies randomly. He pressed the key on the Magellan's spine. The amber glow of the disks brightened, then became erratic, stuttering, flashing. A visible shimmer, like heat haze, began to distort the space around the three museum ships. It made them look like a mirage. The Zarkani fleet fired. Lances of green plasma and heavy kinetic rounds sped across the void. As they entered the shimmering bubble of space around the human ships, something strange happened. The plasma bolts writhed and diffused, spreading out like paint thrown on water. their energy dissipating harmlessly. The kinetic rounds wobbled off their perfect courses, missing the ships by hundreds of meters on the Zarkani bridges. Targeting computers screeched with errors. Their sensors could not get a clean lock. The three relics were there, but also not there. A blur in reality. Commander Krall watched, his anger boiling into fury. They are using some noise. Close the distance. Use point-blank broadsides. Overwhelm it. The Zarkani ships advanced, moving in for the kill. They're coming closer, Hannah warned, her voice tight. Good, Ji-hun whispered, his eyes glued to his screen. The closer they got, the stronger and more focused his field would become. He stopped the chaotic pulse. He needed precision again. He selected two of the lead ships, a destroyer and a frigate. He analyzed their shield data as they approached, a frantic second-by-second calculation. Hannah, target the destroyer. Tae-1, give me anything you can. A flutter, a hiccup in the gravity, just to nudge the frigate. On the Gagarin, Tae-1 rerouted all remaining power to a single maneuvering thruster, firing it in a rapid, jarring burst. It wasn't a gravity well. It was a spatial jab. The frigate's course jerked. Firing, Hannah said. The Mandela's coil gun thumped again. Another tungsten slug flew into the resonant field Ji-hun now tuned specifically for the destroyer. The result was the same, yet more terrifying to the Zarkani who saw it up close. The destroyer's forward section simply dissolved into a silent, expanding fog of particles. The rest of the ship, lifeless, plowed into the frigate that had been knocked off course. Metal screamed in the silent vacuum as the two ships tangled in a ruin of traditional violence. Chaos erupted in the Zarkani formation. The neat wall of ships broke apart. The unseen weapon was bad enough, but seeing two of their own destroyed by what looked like luck and scrap was worse. Orders conflicted. Some ships tried to pull back. Others pushed forward in rage. Krall screamed, demanding order, but the tactical picture was now a mess. The three ancient human ships sat in the center of it all, unharmed, surrounded by a haze of shimmering space and the debris of his fleet. They were no longer relics. They were a fortress, a labyrinth, and at its center, something was humming a tune that broke the world. The silence that followed was not the quiet of space. It was the held breath of two species. The Zarkani formation, once a blade pointed at Earth, was now a confused swarm. Ships drifted, their commanders unsure. The glittering dust of their comrades hung in the void like a warning. In the center of the chaos, the three museum ships rested. The shimmer around them faded as Ji-hun let the resonance field drop. The Magellan systems were overheated, humming with stress. On the Gagarin, Tae-1 worked frantically to cool the stuttering reactor. On the Mandela, Hannah loaded the last tungsten round into the old coil gun. Admiral Dae-young's voice crackled over the command channel to the Magellan. It was thick with emotion. Yi-hun, Mi-kyung, you have given us an opening. The main fleet is reforming on your position. Hold them just a little longer. But Commander Krall had seen the opening too. He saw the human reinforcements moving, but his eyes were locked on the three old ships. They were the key, the source of this humiliation. This could not stand. All power to forward shields, Krall commanded, his voice a cold scrape. Ignore the other human ships. Target the largest relic, the one in the center. The clumsy one. We will ram it if we must. We will wipe the stain from the stars. His flagship, the Reaper's Claw, was a battleship twice the size of the Lost Cruiser. It glowed with intense green energy as it powered forward, a mountain of dark metal moving with terrible purpose. It did not fire. It simply advanced, a battering ram aimed at the heart of the UNSS Magellan. On the Magellan's bridge, the massive ship filled the viewport. He's coming right at us, Mi-kyung said. No fancy shots, just mass. Ji-hun felt a strange calm. They had danced their dance. They had sung their song. Now came the final note. He looked at the data. The Reaper's Claw's shields were at maximum, a solid, roaring wall of energy. His resonance could not penetrate it head-on. Not without help. Tae-1, Ji-hun said into the radio. The Gagarin. Can you make its heart stop? Not skip. Stop. Forever. There was a long pause. They all knew what he was asking. Yes. Taewon's old voice finally came back, steady and sure. I can make it seize. It will create one last pull. A big one. But the reactor will rip itself apart. The Gagarin will be gone. Do it, Jihan said. On my mark. Hannah, aim for the spot where its engines meet the hull. The moment its gravity takes hold. Mikyung looked at Jihan. The array can't handle a full power burst. It will burn out. Jihan nodded, his hands resting on the modulator. I know. One last song. The Reaper's claw grew larger, blotting out the stars. They could see the details of its jagged hull. Now, Taewon, Jihan yelled. Aboard the Gagarin, Taewon closed his eyes and slammed the emergency containment release. For a moment, nothing. Then, the Gagarin's familiar thump stuttered, choked, and ceased. Profound silence fell, followed by a deep, wrong vibration. Space behind the old ship seemed to crumple like paper. A violent, grasping gravity well opened. Not a hiccup, but a voracious mouth. The advancing Reaper's claw was caught in its edge. The massive battleship shuddered. Its forward momentum was savagely slowed. Its nose pulled down towards the dying Gagarin. Its shields flared blinding green, straining against the sudden, unnatural pull. Hannah, fire! Mikyung screamed. The Mandela's final shot rang out. The tungsten slug flew straight and true, aimed at the battleship's exposed engine housing. Where the shield geometry was warped by the gravity well, Jahan took a deep breath. He thought of his grandmother's hands, steady on these same controls. He thought of the mountain. He input a frequency not of destruction, but of sheer, resonant force, a single, pure note of amplified power. He pushed the array to its limit and pressed the key. The discs in the Magellan's spine glowed white-hot. The carrier wave hit the tungsten slug. The effect was not a disintegration. It was a transformation. The slug hit the Reaper's claw and did not stop. Carrying the amplified resonant force, it turned the entire section of hull it struck into a giant speaker. The vibration ripped through the battleship. Conduits exploded. Support beams turned to powder. The engine core, stressed by the gravity well, found its own frequency and joined the chorus. The Reaper's claw did not turn to dust. It came apart in a cataclysm of traditional fire and resonant fury. A chain reaction of explosions walked down its spine, each one fueled by the chaotic energy Jihan had introduced. In a flash of light and hurtling metal, the Zarkani flagship was gone. At the same moment, the Gagarin's reactor gave up. It collapsed in on itself in a silent, dark implosion, leaving only twisted remnants. The Magellan's lights died, the resonance array falling dark forever, its work done. The remaining Zarkani forces froze. Their commander was gone. Their mightiest ship was gone, broken by relics. A wave of pure tactical terror spread through their fleet. Without orders, without hope, they turned. Their drives flared as one, and they fled back into the deep black from which they came. The battle was over. Weeks later, the two remaining museum ships, the UNSS Magellan and the UNSS Mandela, were towed back to their berths at the Lunar Orbit Museum. They were more scarred now, bearing the marks of heat and stress. They were silent once more. A ceremony was held. Admiral Daeung stood before a monument that now listed the Gagarin's final crew. He spoke to the gathered people of Earth. They mocked our history, he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd and the airless void. They called them relics. They saw only rust and age. They did not see the ingenuity welded into every seam. They did not see the courage that built them, still alive in their bones. These ships did not just defend us. They reminded us who we are. Our past is not just memory. It is foundation. And sometimes it is a shield. And sometimes, he said, looking at the quiet, scarred Magellan, it is a very sharp sword. Inside the Magellan, now permanently powered down, Jihan placed a single, fresh flower next to his grandmother's photograph. The ship was a museum piece again, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer a simple artifact of how far they had come. It was a promise. A promise that even in their oldest, quietest places, humanity kept a light burning, and a song waiting to be sung.